All right, everybody. And Mr. Manager, Mr. Archer walking in. Mr. Griffith texted he'll be just a few minutes late, but he is on his way. So we're going to go ahead and get this started. We have need of a study session today on Proposition 123 funding. Who's got this one? Ms. Espino, Ms. Garner.
I got it.
Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Thanks for your time this evening. We just wanted to go over the next step with Prop 123, just give you some an overview, and we have a decision that needs to be made. So we just wanted to talk about next steps and get the council's feedback. So I will just briefly go through, this is our agenda. We're going to talk about the background and the timeline, our housing commitments, this expedited review, which is a component of Prop 123, and the legislation, next steps, and then any questions and discussion following that. So next slide. So as you probably, well, some of you may remember, and some of you were sitting on this council when this happened. But back in 2022, when Colorado voters approved Prop 123, we were right there, I have to say, really eager, ready to get going. So after we got the enabling statutes in 2023, we jumped in with basically moving forward with a resolution that the council provided, and got that adopted and moved forward. And then okay, so council approved resolution. This is the last step, sorry. So this is the last thing that we need to actually do is talk about this expedited review. That's a requirement of Prop 123. And this has to be done according to the state statute by the end of this year. So December 23rd, or 31st, 2026. And we'll talk a little bit about what that is going to entail. I believe, Sam, you're on for the housing commitment. So she's going to talk a little bit about what we did, and we're very proud of this. This is, I think we're one of the only communities that was able to not only meet our requirement, but exceed it. So it's pretty incredible.
And a lot of those that have met it, they had requirements of like 5, 10 units. One was like 13. Our initial hi, I'm Sam Bradley, by the way. I'm I'm with housing. I'm the Affordable Housing Development Specialist. So we had a dual commitment when we agreed to opt in to Prop 123. Both of those commitments needed to be met by December 31st of 2026. The housing commitment was to increase what the state had calculated as our baseline by 3% per year, or 9% over 9 years. They didn't really care what kind of order it went in. So it was really 9% over 3 years. So our baseline commitment ended up being 417 units. We have already exceeded that commitment. I don't think we're quite done counting, but as of right now, what stands as having been accepted by DOLA. So these have already gone through the DOLA review process. They've already been approved and added to our count. We've got Marshall Street Landing, so that's 85 units of new construction. Legacy Senior Housing, that's 72 units of new construction. Marshall Point is 260 units. However, some of those units are set at rent thresholds of 70% AMI, so those did not count towards our baseline commitment, but because it's a LIHTC project, the average of all of the units in the building have to be at or below 60%. So the vast majority of them are below 60%, just so that you could get to that 60% average. That actually is a rule that is changing next year for the next funding cycle. It's if you use LIHTC, you can use income averaging. So the whole 260 would have counted, but due to a technicality in the rule, we only got to count 221. Also, the Parkview Village was rehabbed. So that was an extensive rehab of that Foothills property. So that contributed 96 units. So it's interesting, the rehab and the NOAA units are actually a little bit more flexible and a little bit more amalgamous than the new construction units. So we were able to count the Parkview Village. Beyond Home, that was a rehab. They're doing 37 units total, but only 10 have been submitted so far. So I'll probably go back in and submit more if more have been done. And finally, we participate in the Brothers Redevelopment program, which is that essential home repair program for low-income homeowners. There is an income verification process, and at this point, up 31 units have been rehabbed and accepted by DOLA. So we are now sitting at 515 units, counting towards our commitment. So I really want 2 more so we can say we beat it by 100.
If I could quickly add to this, Arvada did such an excellent job at meeting this commitment that we're actually one of the few to have met it early. I believe it's less than 10 communities have met its commitment, the unit count commitment so far. And Sam has been asked to present at an upcoming webinar that DOLA is doing so she can share some of her best practices with across the state. So that's really exciting, and kudos to Sam for all of her hard work.
Sorry, we're not sweating.
Can we go to the next slide, please?
So can I ask something really quick about that? Just to add to, I would love to see your slides and what you present to DOLA, because I'm very curious too about just the timeline and everything that led up to all of that. So
Yeah, absolutely. I can send them over. All right, so the second part of our commitment is this expedited review process. So that's a 90-day fast track review. Since we opted into Prop 123, they've released more and more clarification on what they're expecting. So this is only going to apply to applications where 50% or more of the dwelling units are affordable, and they even defined affordable for us. So for that means if it's rental, it means 60% AMI or lower. So that kind of aligns with their baseline count. And the for sale is 100% area median income or lower, which we didn't really have. Well, we did have some home ownership units with the Brothers repair program. So it aligns with what they define in their baseline. So that's what we've committed to, and to have this completed and to meet the expectation of that December 31st deadline, what we need to do is to come up with a plan, pass the resolution, and then give the passed resolution to DOLA, who will then evaluate it and let us know whether we passed or failed. So we just need to pass the resolution by December 31st. They haven't really gone into what happens if you pass the resolution and then DOLA rejects it, but DOLA is currently offering a courtesy pre-review before it goes before council and it becomes a resolution. So I think that should take care of some of that heartburn of passing something that then DOLA may come back and want adjustments to. So we can take care of that process in advance. And I think those are my slides, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So the next few slides talk about just the nuts and bolts of the expedited review process and what we're gonna plan to do in order to align our LDC with Proposition 123. So as for the 90-day review period, so that applies to projects such as conditional use review, site plan review, and building permit review. So each review type is granted the 90-day review timeframe. And then the 90-day clock can be paused at the request of the applicant or at the time an application response is being prepared by the applicant. However, the clock cannot be paused for any public hearing process. So if a conditional use process requires a public hearing, then we can't pause it. Next slide. Currently, the conditional use review is required for residential uses in the MXS, MXU, and MXT zoning districts. The process entails planning commission recommendation and city council action by ordinance, so 2 readings. So residential uses in all other residential districts and MXN only require an administrative process. So typically the conditional use review timeline entails publication, so publication of notice, which is at least 21 days prior to planning commission meeting, but it can overlap with city council. 15-day public notice prior to each public hearing, that's notice on the site. And that can have some overlap with council as well. And a minimum of 14 days between the city council first reading and the public hearing. And the conditional use review process from start to finish is usually a minimum of 60 days, and that's covered. Next slide. So for site plan and building permit review, we don't have specific timelines in the land development code, and those are just administrative processes. By policy though, for a project that's eligible under Proposition 123, we could have a policy that we would review applications within the 90 days. There are consequences to failing to comply. If we fail to render decision within those 90 days, that would result in the loss of funding under Proposition 123. And as well as we would have a minimum of 1 year to wait in order to apply for any funding. And our development partners would also have to wait for a year as well. So our proposed next step to align our LDC with Proposition 123 is to amend Table 3122 of the LDC. I know this is very small, but the next slide will describe that language in the footnote. But what we're going to do is we're going to add a footnote to this table that basically exempts projects that are covered by Proposition 123. So the language of that footnote is projects that will have 50% or more of the dwelling units meeting the affordable housing definition per statute as amended from time to time and be deed restricted to that definition shall be exempt from the conditional use process and are subject to an administrative process only. So that would be the proposed language we would pose as part of the LDC amendment to comply with Proposition 123. So that's the end of our presentation. Are there any questions?
Could you just explain conditional use?
So in a nutshell, an application comes forward that is in one of those mixed use zone districts, and it's an affordable project. It meets those Prop 123 requirements. But according to our code, it is still required to go through a conditional use permit. So what we are.
Because it's residential.
Because it has a residential component in
It's
a
going
mixed
into
use
mixed
area.
use.
Yeah.
Whereas what you said, if it's residential going into residential, then there's no conditional.
It's just by right. Yeah. So this is the challenge is that if we have an affordable housing project that wants to go into some of those areas, which we've seen, that happens.
Very recently.
Yeah. But it's not affordable, actually.
Well, that one's not,
But-
but you're right.
But we do have several examples that are. The process would then be that it would just go to an administrative, we would review it.
Right.
And we would hold it up to the land development code standards and approve it.
Similar to what we do in a residential.
Exactly.
And our call-up process for things that are administratively reviewed, what would happen with that?
That would have to be null and void for those projects because again, it's that shot clock that we have 90 days and if we don't comply, we lose our funding.
How much funding is it?
It's, I will defer to my colleagues. This also means for any property owners or developers that want to come into the city, they're also not able to utilize Prop 123 in our community for up to a year. So I don't know, Sam and
Oh.
Karen, do you guys have?
It's not just the one project?
No, it's everybody. If we don't meet it, then we don't meet it for a year.
Okay.
Basically being like punished.
You lose your funding for a year, and I will note, just for the sake of the upcoming, the team is correct that not many communities have managed to hit this goal. So when funding opens up in 2027, there's a very large pot for very few fish. They're even looking at trying to extend it because of that reason. So we're one of the few fish that can be swimming in that pond. Bob?
So I'm a little worried about that. So let's go through that process. One, mixed use was intentional. The policy around it was intentional by council because we wanted to review for this exact reason. We did not want 100% residential going to mixed use because we have a limited tax base opportunity. So now we lose all that over an unknown dollar amount and 1 year, but we lose sales tax forever. So I'm a little nervous, and then not allowing our people, our community to have a voice has been removed because there was no call up. And there's no process, public hearing process. The other thing is if we've exceeded this number, how did we do it if we weren't doing it within the 90 days?
Because this was not part of the requirement for the first round of Prop 123. We had
This
to
is a new-
commit to it by the end of 2026. So.
So we
no.
have to start complying by the end of 2026.
Yeah, and this
that's-
wasn't new. This was part of the resolution that the council signed in 2023, I think,
That we'd have a 90-day shot clock,
that you would have an expedited review process for affordable housing.
which at the time, did it have the 90 days?
I'm pretty sure it did. Yeah, I don't think anything has changed with that.
So you're saying we had a resolution that said 90 days, but yet we weren't following our resolution?
No.
So in the resolution, it says that we will commit to approve an expedited review process by December 31st of 2026. So we had time to build up to the expedited review process, but those projects that Sam mentioned in that previous slide that were part of our unit count, they were not subject to the 90-day requirement. All projects starting 2027 will be.
We could have done it sooner. We didn't.
I have some reservations, but I'll let the rest of the council.
Shauna.
I'll just say to your point, Councilmember Pfeiffer, I think the limitation is based on the number of affordable housing units that we need. So, of course, all mixed use, we aren't going to be like, let's flip it all residential for the reasons that you're saying. But I think our affordable housing need is like, 2,178 units or something like that. And I don't know on the 20% greenfield we have left or infill we have left, how many housing units are possible or with mixed use. But I do think there is an inherent limitation that we are not going to be approved or build for projects past the affordable housing need. So I just wanted to point that out as when we are looking at these things that are going to be coming up, that we can say, okay, we do need more affordable housing here, even though it was originally zoned for mixed use for one reason or the other, because we're trying to hit this goal of what the actual need is.
So you're saying once we meet the need, so we've got 500 and some now. Once we get to 2,000, was it 2,000?
2,100 or
No.
so, or how?
No, well, I mean, the Councilmember Ambrose is right. We have a certain deficit that we would like to catch up and keep up. But then we have a required amount of units that through Prop 123 that we need to be able to meet. And that's based on, Sam, the 9%.
They are changing they're changing the formulation of how many units each community needs to do. Because previously, some of the counts with certain communities were just completely astronomical. They didn't make too much sense. I'm so sorry, I don't know when it's ringing. So the new methodology is going to be based on average number of permits issued times a multiplier that's going to be determined by job growth in the city. So they haven't released the tool of how to do it, but I think Jefferson County is sort of playing around with the estimates, and our commitment might be substantially lower.
So I feel like there's two different measurements, right? One is like the affordable housing were allotted by Prop 123 that the program is saying you are allowed to use this program to fill. And then there's our own internal assessment from our housing study that says this is how many we're trying to meet. So it's not like Prop 123 could meet all of our amount, but I'm just saying that we already have limits in place of how much affordable housing we would change mixed use for, because we say this particular project, 50% affordable, is worth it to change the mixed use, the loss of sales tax and the other cons you're talking about. So I'm just bringing up that there are limitations. It's not unlimited.
Well, I just want to clarify on that point then to make sure I understand that once we meet the Prop 123 requirements, are we beholden to this expedited review beyond that?
Yes.
It would be very difficult for the code to know when we hit that requirement, and then for us to say, okay, we're good. Because what if that project backs out, and somebody else comes in, or,
Sure.
I think it would have to apply to any mixed use area that allows residential as a conditional use.
Let's also remember, the market will play factors and control here on this. It's not like it suddenly becomes a free-for-all. Affordable housing, even with Prop 123, is already a lot harder to build than market rate. There's more stuff. So, we would still I think there will be natural controls on how many units start to take advantage of this anyways. I don't see it just being a floodgate of new projects all over the place.
Welby Gardens is a great example. They didn't go for it.
Yeah, sorry,
Right.
Sharon.
So that was gonna be, I agree with Councilmember Pfeiffer about taking away a public process. We already kind of get hammered, by the public on what they perceive. I'm not saying it's true. It's what they perceive as our lack of a public process when we move forward on issues and projects. And so, and 90 days is quick. I can see people coming to council and banging on the table and saying, why didn't we have a public process in this? So I think that when we're moving forward on these things, that we definitely have to have a robust public outreach and education on what this is. I say Prop 123 to my husband and he's just, I don't know what you're talking about. So I don't think the public's gonna know what we're talking about. And so when we do these things, we really need to, we need to think about optics as well. We want to have affordable housing. I agree. I think we're doing a fantastic job. But we're always gonna have these people that are gonna come back on the back end and yell at us because I didn't know. And so let's position ourselves in a position of altruism and balance.
And I will say, I think we get the optics issue no matter what we do, because if we don't do it, the optics of, oh, we backed out of Prop 123 after being one of the first cities to sign into it 3 years ago. I don't necessarily like the optics
Well,
of
I don't
that.
think we're backing out.
No.
Just thinking we could fail. I mean,
Yeah,
there's a difference between worrying about exceeding or meeting the 1, 2, 3 versus the 700 constituents who show up, who live here and
Yeah.
around the project, who are upset, who.
well, I mean, there are people in this community. Remember, Prop 123 was the voters of the state, including the voters of Arvada, voted that through. That's not a state created from the legislature. The voters passed it.
I want to hear,
Quite
what's
strong.
the rest of your thought?
Well, I just
Thanks.
think you have to think about the people around. If you take away a due process for public hearing and public input, it's just that I'm not a fan of it.
I don't disagree, Bob. I would prefer to keep a public process too,
So
but
just for sake of scenario building, if a project that was pretty big that we recently saw had 50% affordable housing for rent and for sale at 60 and 100% AMI, that would not have gone to city council at all.
I don't believe it would have.
I think far and away, the thing we hear from the public is that it's very expensive to live in the city. And I don't know if that is the top issue, but it's in the top 3. It's gotta be. And maybe there's some messaging or world building around, okay, there are certain ways to achieve the goal of making it more affordable. And there's trade-offs involved. And one of those trade-offs is gonna be the public process. I don't know how you get feedback back from the public on that as a potentiality, and if they still agree that the affordability problem is a top concern. But that's what we're hearing right now, is that affordability is this big issue. And I mean, there's only so many ways to address it. How much funding, like what does the stack look like for a project?
Here.
An imaginary 400 unit project.
Okay, so a couple of things. First, it's going to be highly unlikely that you get a unit of something that's 50% market rate and 50%, 60%. 60% uses LIHTC, and the market rate is going to be excluded from LIHTC. Developers used to do a thing called condoing out the units where they would have a market mixed with LIHTC, but the numbers don't work. They want to get that eligible basis. So you're much, much, much more likely to have a project that is 100% LIHTC. So that's sort of like a nuance of the legislation that it makes it seem like you can have these projects that are 50% luxury market rate and 50%, 60% AMI affordable. And that's just not a thing that happens very frequently. Even the projects that we have that were mixed, they usually target to 80% AMI. So when you look at the capital stacks of these LIHTC projects, because it's probably going to be a LIHTC project, it's incredibly precarious. We as a city also contribute contributed very substantially to all of those projects that were built in the forms of grants, in the forms of SLP agreements, in the forms of HAP contracts that assigned project-based vouchers to help boost the rent so that they could squeeze a little bit more out of their permanent loan. We have given them direct loans from our affordable housing fund. All of that was approved by council, and these projects would have collapsed without that support. So in terms of how these capital stacks work, a lot of them do go for loans from CHAFA. So the way CHAFA is currently using Prop 123 is they do have Prop 123 programs, but they're also using Prop 123 money to infuse some of their other programs. So our Marshall Point program was not necessarily, or our Marshall Point loan was not necessarily a Prop 123 loan, but it was infused with, because CHAFA is kind of treating it as one giant pot. We do have a project coming up that has a $6.5 million award from CHAFA under the Prop 123 program. The total development cost on that building is about $35-ish million, and 6.7 is coming from CHAFA. This project would collapse without Prop 123 financing. The other thing is, because these capital stacks, they don't go together in 90 days. It could take years. And I'm talking like 5 years, 6 years. You know, a lot of the ones that we recently closed on predate me starting at the city. The developer can also hit pause if they feel like this 90-day review process that they can't hit all of their milestones, which is something that we expect would happen. I think it's just more to prevent cities from just intentionally delaying, if that makes any sense. Like, that's sort of the idea behind it, but they still need a tremendous amount of city support, both financial, mostly financial, actually.
So the developer can hit pause, but the city can't?
Correct.
Interesting. And I'm also still trying to get around. So we said in this example,
Mhm.
6 million versus a 35 something million dollar total build. I'm trying to get a sense of like how much manipulation there would be for a project and how much it would attract developers to build. Like, are we gonna have a frenzy for projects, or are there gonna be like few like we have right now that are really hard and take a long time to actually do?
Well,
We're gonna see more of
I
those.
think that's really gonna depend on market conditions and how much support the city can offer. Right now, the city cannot support too many projects at once. If we got 20 applications in, we probably would only be able to support maybe 1 or 2 of them. So then the other 18 projects, they probably just get in line. I mean, we don't have unlimited PBV or PAB. We don't have unlimited project-based vouchers that we can attach. We don't have unlimited funds in the Affordable Housing Fund. A lot of these projects received sort of, I don't want to say, not as sort of like a little bit of leniency in how they calculated their development fees. We just wouldn't be able to do it, and it would financially kill the projects.
And we don't know the target yet, because the target's based on a calculation tool that we don't have.
The amount of units.
Yeah.
So they're
A year.
so I mean, per year almost doesn't matter, because they look, the way they look at it is the 3-year cycle. So the estimate that I saw was around 200.
Okay, so
3 years.
this is good. Go ahead.
And if I could add to that quickly, what we're hearing from DOLA and CHAFA is that even though these rounds open up for funding applications, it's heavily oversubscribed. So even if developers wanted to jump in and apply more, they're going to be very limited in the number of applications they can award.
So this is good, and thank you so much. That helps me understand it quite a bit. I'm trying to put my mind in the position of Joe Public and Susie Public, and it sounds rough. Like, you're just gonna bypass the public process and developers are gonna get free money to come and build whatever they want, wherever, as long as it's cheap housing. All that sounds pretty bad, to be honest. But that's not what I'm hearing from what's likely to happen. What's likely to happen is maybe we get a couple hundred units over a period of years, which is what we're already doing.
And that's what we have to socialize.
But the public's not gonna see that unless we are very clear about it.
Very clear with outreach and education, correct?
So what are other cities doing in response to this requirement? Are they all
Over
completely getting?
127 cities have already adopted a 90-day fast track.
So they've done the 90-day fast track. And that means for all of them, I mean, the getting rid of the public process piece. Is that actually a requirement, or is that just assumed that it goes away because of the 90 days? Are there any cities that have figured a way around that and still include public process?
I
haven't thought it was a requirement, but
I don't think it's, I don't believe it's a requirement, is it?
it's not.
I think we would have
You'd have to be
objected
able-
as a city
you
council.
just have
We would
to
not have adopted it.
Yeah, it's.
Public process.
John would have been like,
Yeah.
So I'm asking that and saying, is there another alternative out there that we're not considering right now? And doing the 90 days, but looking at a different way to do public process that allows us to have public engagement and still meet the 90 days. It isn't necessarily the way we've been doing things now.
Well, what I'm hearing, so, because I agree, the hybrid solution, and this makes it tougher on the team, I don't know if it's possible, I look to you to tell me if this is even possible, is that what if we made it still subject to call up, but then it would be more or less like an ideal targeted 75-day review. We have a pretty good idea which projects are coming down the pike that are making noise. And then we would know ahead of time, this one might want a call, we might want to call up on this one. So we plan accordingly, I guess, as projects are coming, whereas this one, this one's not making any noise whatsoever. We think it's likely to sail kind of through. And then we would be scheduling our time accordingly, because for a call up, correct me if I'm wrong, Jessica, that's still just a 2-week, right? We have the shot clock from your approval. We do a call up, put
And
first reading on.
Skipped over planning commission,
And
it
it's
comes right
skipped
to
and it
us.
comes right to us. And so we don't necessarily have to eliminate the call up. We've had the call up on the books for 4 years now. We've never once actually used it. So we tried once to use it and it wasn't on a residential development project.
I would say the one thing to keep in mind in
Yeah.
that process though is
I love that in and out.
you do have the call up
I hate
option,
that,
but
yeah.
then once you say, if the council says they want to call, you want to call it up, then we do have the public hearing process.
Yeah.
And all of that time. would
But
count.
it doesn't go through planning, it just comes right, so doesn't that move straight to council first reading and then
Yeah,
hearing?
post.
It would
So
have to
like
be
a
just,
60-day notification, right?
but it is notification time and that would cut down on
On the 90 days.
our
Yeah.
time to review.
I know.
this and that.
Yeah.
That's what I mean is we kind of plan accordingly. Once projects are in the review, we start to notice which ones make noise.
But I think the reason behind this is that pretty much everybody's like, I love affordable housing unless it's in my backyard,
Exactly.
not in my
Exactly.
backyard. So we know that anything that is affordable housing, I mean, how did Marshall Point, those on the east side,
Not
what was
much.
the public response
For both
there?
Marshall Point and Marshall Street Landing, we got a couple of emails, but it wasn't
What is
There's
that
more-
over here?
A lot of people in the planning.
Garrison.
Garrison Street sale. So I missed that one because I was in DC for that hearing, but
Anything
both-
for the Garrison one.
no, we didn't have any for
Where
Garrison.
it's located.
And we didn't have any for Marshall Point or Marshall Street. We had like a few for each, but both of those were really quiet.
Yeah.
Would the
Two
developers
B3.
still be required to have neighborhood meetings?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we would.
Now try putting them out
Well,
before.
I guess it
You don't-
depends.
We
Yeah,
can
yeah.
send out a
The G
notice
myself
of the
then.
minute, when an administrative case comes in, we send out a notice just so people are aware of the case.
G lines.
But there's no public process with an administrative case.
In some parts.
I don't know, I would like to see if we can think outside the box at all.
too.
And look at, is there another way to do public engagement and still stick in with the 90 days that isn't the traditional way we do public engagement?
Sure.
I think that, correct me, Sam, if I'm mistaken, but you said 120 cities have adopted the first, can't even read my writing. My first track review. I was wondering if we could, of those 127 cities, we could ask CML via the housing committee, maybe we could figure out
Yeah.
what some of those processes are.
Yeah, and I do know that some of them have kept a public hearing process.
Yeah, I think that's.
So it just depends on where you want to cut. I'm not super familiar with the actual process that planning goes through.
And again, it's for CML, we touch on cities on the Front Range, but I mean, let's think about Lamar. There is a city that just recently unincorporated in Penrose County. Just even though they're not along any kind of transit area, if they're along a highway, that's considered. So it'd be interesting to see what other folks are doing.
Yeah, I think something just to remember is that our codes are all pretty different, right?
Oh,
And we're not talking about
absolutely.
rezoning here. Like this isn't about a rezoning. And so we're pretty unique that we have a conditional use permit process.
Mhm.
That's somewhat unique. So
is
that's
it?
part of why I think the challenge.
So one of the things I think I struggle with when we changed our zoning, we did create some uniqueness in that zoning and we introduced administrative reviews. And, you know, one of the things that the intent of the council at the time was to fast track development because everything was being reviewed. If I remember right, everything was being reviewed. And so, you know, one of the things around the MX I worry about is, well, is it zoned right? Because like even the Welby Gardens, I question how that ended became MX. It's not even on a major road. It's pushed in the back. It's in a neighborhood. And why did we even think of putting that as MX? It should have been zoned as residential because that's what's out there. And the frontage road is already taken away from the retirement home. So, you know, should we, you know, I'd be more comfortable with maybe this process if we were pretty solid in our zoning, like the preset zoning. Like I wouldn't want to see a 5-story apartment. I'm sorry, I'm pointing at you. I'm looking at you.
Please.
No. A 5-story buildings being popped up in that 21 acres because they got LIHTC funding and created this huge density and they just get rubber stamped in. And I worry about that. So is our zoning correct in the right places that makes sense for us while preserving our tax? Maybe we just need to readjust some pockets that don't make sense. Because if that was residential, you know what I mean? Then I don't know if I'd worry about it as much because it would probably have been use of right. And there's probably a height, I'm assuming there's a height, right, limit, whatever that is.
Is it because there was a business on it? That's why it was.
It probably was because it was industrial. It's probably light industrial at one point. And we should have just known that when we got rezoned, it should be pushed. But we should look at what's around these little pockets and maybe revisit that with a fine tooth. It's just kind of like even the RV park or RV
Yeah.
little pocket issue we had.
Kilmer Loop.
Are there, I feel like there's Swiss cheese on this city.
I don't think we have any more of
Oh, you already
those.
combed through all those.
Yeah, but
But we have Swiss cheese through our city, right? I mean, we have county pockets everywhere.
yes.
They're ag and we might have them as MX when they're in ag and, you know, maybe they should be residential because everything around it's residential. You know, I think we maybe be more thoughtful in that process and maybe just glance through it and
we can do that. We can absolutely do that. I think the comp plan gives us that opportunity.
do that.
What we don't have though is time.
It's the time.
So I think it's,
We just need to have a commitment that even if the time wasn't there, that we have a commitment by the team, that you probably need to look at that so we don't have a gotcha.
Yeah.
Because if we have to do this and we don't have a public process, we need to be a little bit tighter that I don't, you know, I have a backyard that looks over the golf course and all of a sudden I have a 5-story apartment complex now shadowing my house, you know, and that was because we didn't, that was an MX. And because they got to go through the process and no public hearing, all my rights as a property owner goes out the window because they decided to use LIHTC and Prop 123. So I want to avoid that.
Oh, sorry, the Home Act.
Yeah,
It'll be
that
interesting
also.
to also see.
Yes.
Very, very different topic, but
Mhm.
as the Home Act comes into play, which is what churches, schools,
Right.
nonprofits, as a use by right? for
Yeah, I think our
Vineyard is
this-
chomping at the bit right now.
the state of Colorado would like us to look at land use differently. This is not the first time. This won't be the last time we're going to have this conversation and we'll see what happens with a new governor. But the traditional way, I think, of looking at zoning and looking at what should go next to other people has been turned on its head. And I think a lot of it comes down to the issues that are important and our priorities right now to the state, which is affordable housing. So
Well-
we're happy to look at all of our mixed use districts. We can provide a table and we can go through each one of them. I do know that at this point, aside from the one project that Samantha just mentioned, that workforce housing project that's working its way through, we don't have any other projects on the books. Everything has really, it was a lot of backlog to get through what we got through, and that accounts for the incredibly robust number of housing units that we've already been able to build.
And to, to even go into what I'm saying a little bit is, I don't know how often developers here in Arvada would get the money. Whereas places in the mountains would get the money before us probably.
It might.
Yeah.
Because there's no workforce up there at all. Workforce housing
Yes, you're right.
is gone. There's none. So, what's our risk? But the difference is we're actually changing our code. Whereas the state still hasn't defined what the hell we're shooting for. So it worries me that I'm gonna tell residents, we're gonna define a process that people can bypass the public hearing, but the state doesn't know their details just yet.
Yeah, and I know we'll get that information, probably before the end of this year.
Yes.
I think in the next couple months or so, we'll get that guidance. They're remarkably good at coming up with that on the fly. But yeah,
And revising
it will most
6
likely
months
be
later.
less than what our existing criteria was, which is nice. I think they're trying to be more flexible because we were definitely an outlier. All the other communities that were not able to make those numbers, believe me, they are going to the state and they are very upset about what they're also losing out on. And so I think they're trying to soften this number. But we're nowhere near
Sense.
200 units, nowhere near.
Can you help educate me? We have a property that's currently being used in like a commercial way. We can't just say you're now residential.
Not unless it gets rezoned. If it depends on what the zoning is. If it's zoned commercial or industrial.
Yeah.
No, they'd have to rezone it. If it's zoned mixed use to whatever extent, we may allow it, but it would require that conditional use.
I guess I'm saying like in the property that we're talking about, it was being used in a commercial way.
Mhm.
Would we be able to basically zone it as something else right underneath the property owner? Like,
Not without their permission.
okay. Because
I mean, we could, but it would be against their consent.
Be a taking, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
some sort
Or
of
grandfathered use.
new
Yep.
burden or something.
Condemnation.
I don't know for sure because I haven't looked at every parcel in the city. I think we got like 50,000 or something of them, but I would assume that most of our mixed use parcel designations coincide with a historic or current use. We wouldn't make something residential without it already being residential.
Most
that right?
likely, yeah. In most.
Well,
Sure.
Well,
Because I know areas we've had as residential and if somebody comes in and says, well, now we want to make it mixed use. They don't ask for rezoning as long as our comp plan says we plan for it to be MX and
but
its
you're
future
upzoning
state.
it. So yeah,
In your future state.
you wouldn't
Right.
down zone.
No, you went down zone.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We wouldn't be able to, I don't think we'd be able to do that. Like basically take a
Yeah, we
commercial
would do
area.
that underneath, but if somebody says, well, hey, I want to build apartments and our comprehensive plan or whatever zoning says this is allowed,
Right.
even though it's currently zoned to something else, then,
it's
right?
actually
Yeah, but that's in part
businesses on the
usually
first
with those
floor.
property owners. We don't do it against if they're saying, we want to build residential and we say, we think industrial makes great sense
Well,
here.
but we had a light industrial with Welby Gardens and we had it changed to an MXS
Right.
in our plan.
Yep.
And we weren't looking at a rezoning. It was a change. So I don't know how that change works. Maybe I'm lost.
I don't know when the property changed.
Are they from Morningstar?
Yeah, Bobby Gardens, trying to remember.
That was not a zoning change, but.
Didn't it
we
happen
changed
during the
something.
2019 LDC update?
The designation did, but it was already a commercially zoned property,
Mhm.
so it was
Right.
commercial and we.
It was not
changed it to
industrial.
mixed use.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
And I think it was PUD, BP, or one of those PUD districts we used to have.
Yeah.
But it was a commercial use, it was never a residential use.
Mhm.
So we just went from commercial to mixed use to potentially add that residential use in. I don't remember there being a lot of conversation around that particular piece of property at the time, but I know there were some conversations.
And in these efforts, they're not like parcel by parcel, right? You're looking at large swaths.
Right, that we did as the legislature.
Otherwise, you'd be there
Yeah.
for like 10 years doing the whole thing.
And we're going to be looking at land use with our comp plan. We're going to be going through every area of the city and asking the same questions. Should this be what it is? Do we want it to be something different? Is there some mandate for that? we will do that through this process. And if that entails a zone change, then we can change it with a comp plan. We'll come back with a land development code amendment and change those. So there's time for us to talk about that.
Cool.
I loved what you said at one of the meetings where you said the comp plan was aspirational and the land use plan was actually the implementation.
Mhm.
I think that we really need to think of it like that. The comp plan is aspirational, but we're gonna eventually make changes. I don't know anybody here who hasn't had to upgrade their anything in their home. Everybody loves a new sink and faucet or you have to put in a new furnace. So things change. And so ideas change and you change your yard. I mean, I see people in my neighborhood removing mulch so that their houses don't burn down and they're putting in a different product because they want to follow what some of the fire code is doing. So I think that that aspirational implementation, I thought that was wonderful. And thank you so much for that. Really put that in my mind.
The shoulds and the shalls.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Not shalls. You're still being
Yeah.
coded.
I'm gonna tattoo that on both my.
Exactly.
There was a podcast recently and what was it described as the cookbook versus the recipe,
Yes.
right? I thought that was good.
Oh, that was Paul.
Too.
Paul said that.
Yes.
He did a really good job. I enjoyed the
Yeah,
podcast.
yeah.
It was good.
I like
Just leaving,
that.
by the way. Sorry. Sorry.
I won't have him.
I can.
Rebecca has a question.
So just to kind of clarify, so Prop 123 takes away the public hearing or could take that away.
But it's not required under.
It's not required. Is that to make a really difficult thing? We're trying to make a difficult thing easier? Is that kind of
It's
what's behind it?
Yeah, well, typically when you talk to an affordable housing developer, the biggest enemies that they have are time and money.
Hmm.
And often, well, they're kind of almost the same when you start thinking about the amount of time it can take to get through a public hearing process. I am not using Arvada as an example. There are other cities out there that can really draw that process out. It could be, several before they finally get to a point where it's either we have broken them down and have gotten everything we want, or we've scared them to death and they've run away and we don't have that project. And so I think that the intention here is if we're working on affordable housing projects, we want to bring them in as quickly as possible because we want to spend as much money as we can on putting people in homes, not going through a public process. So I think that's really kind of the rationale for it.
And then this sounds to me like one of those areas where it's like, okay, people voted for this, they voted for us, and what we're missing is that trust piece is what I'm hearing too. Because I think also what needs to be brought up is affordable housing has a stigma around it and there's fear, like whether it's what we want to happen. So when it comes to public engagement, could like town halls or education sessions or I just did something with Aura and there's a big misunderstanding for people around what Aura does, that they do more gray fields, brown fields, but we're not touching green fields and because those can be more easily developed. So it sounds like, I guess, if we didn't go the public hearing route or things like that, could we establish like just better outreach to the community?
Education.
Which I feel like falls on, I mean, y'all should be able to like take off, on Friday and have your weekend off. But I think that's where we step in as elected officials is that connection to residents and making sure their questions are asked. So yeah, what can we do?
Yeah. Oh, we can do a lot to socialize that. I think we can talk through that. We can also work with the council. And if you want to think through a different kind of process, I like I said, time is not on our side at this point, but we can commit to look at that. We may have to put a resolution forward and say, we can play by your rules for now, but also knowing we don't have a lot of active projects right now that are like, we've got to go. So this is not something that's going to be curtailing any development that we have right now. But we could work within the next year to try and bring something to the council that would be more palatable.
I like that just because I don't want to get caught up in the whirlwind and do something half-assed when we can whole-ass it.
I think we can do it through the comp plan. I think we'll actually learn a lot through that process, which may give us some very tangible steps forward.
That works.
And then my other question is, does the housing committee had anything what did they have to say? I always wonder what boards and commissions.
Well, I think they're in 100% full support of moving it forward. They're big fans of Prop 123.
Okay.
And I think simplifying our process is part of our Arvada strategic housing plan. It was more specifically through the LDC. But, you know, just the simplification of that process, getting things moving faster, because as Jessica mentioned, time and money are really big enemies of affordable housing development. So it is one of those strategies. It doesn't particularly call out Prop 123, and we need to adopt this fast track. But it is a recommendation to simplify the process.
Thank you so much for the work, and please pass it along to the committee as well.
Varies.
And then before we break, I just wanted to point out, because I don't know that this was included in the materials that you received today, and this is a fairly different council than the one that approved this resolution. But it's resolution 23-061, and we might be able to include that in the next round of information, or however it is that we're continuing that communication, where the previous council adopted this commitment with Proposition 123, and in that resolution, the city council opted into creating the obligation to increase affordable housing, which our CED team talked about in their presentation. And in that resolution, the council also opted into creating a 90-day approval process for affordable development projects by 2026. There wasn't a lot of information in the resolution about exactly how that was going to happen, but the commitment was made in 2023 to adopt a process by the end of 2026 in compliance with Proposition 123. And then for my team, so that we get some clarity too on what the council is asking us to do or look into next time to get you guys more information, I think what I kind of heard as I was listening into the discussion is that there's an interest in seeing what other municipalities are doing and how they're engaging the public in this expedited process. And there's some concern with losing the call-up process. And those are the two main things that
Public.
And if there's a way that we could incorporate public process in our expedited 90 days, and what that might look like.
I could tell you at least sitting up there when we were going through this was, we were thinking the 90 days didn't deal with getting rid of the public process. There was more of, it took you 1 year to get it even to council because all of our other things that we don't know what you guys do, you know, the sausage making was somehow going to be tightened, and then it gets thrown into a fast track into council. But
I
can
would
tell you
echo
that was
that. We
the-
were not told that public process was going away.
Correct.
Yeah, I figured the permit, all that other stuff would get tightened up, not get rid of the council's process. Because we would have said no.
33031.
yes, it's resolution, and we can send the resolution via email if that's easiest for council, but it's
I remember that, and I think we did ask that question about public process, and
I wasn't
And it's
here. I'm just gonna
resolution-
make a point
Right.
of saying.
I think my predecessor 23-6061.
Ask Rob, did we tell us we're here?
061, yeah.
Resolution 20.
But to be fair to everybody, I don't think anyone knew really what that one meant. So I mean,
I agree.
yeah, because just like to this day, it drives me crazy. The state is still trying to figure out what the airplane they're trying to build while flying it, going on bullshit. But you know, this is last minute stuff, and we probably didn't know. And so we made the assumption that it was your all's process was going to be tightened up, not the city council's. But I'm gonna push that we should have at least a call-up process that can fit into this somehow, some way, because if we get too much push from the community and we're just saying, well, sorry, that's a state issue.
Right.
And we already have a trust issue that we just talked about. And to put this out right now would just throw it right on top of the trust issue. Might as well abandon the whole tax discussion completely. I'd give up on it
Yes,
completely.
I give it.
So I think if I could just reiterate what I'm hearing, thank you, Jessica, for recapping, but to add on, so it sounds like we need your desires. Let's go back and look and see. Sam, it sounds like you've got a couple of examples. Is there a way to keep an element of public
Yes.
process when we think we might need it?
Yes,
Yes. Okay.
That's why the
That's
call-up is not
Right.
mandatory, but
So
Summarized, Ally.
I
Thank
think,
you.
I think don't we have to do the posting only for 14 days?
17.
Who picked 17?
You guys did. That's very on.
Well, if that is something that needs to change,
Weeks and holidays and
then
stuff.
we should look at changing
Because remember,
that to this
sometimes-
particular ones. Maybe it's a 7-day.
Yeah.
And then
Makes sense.
July sometimes in the
Yeah.
middle of the week.
That makes sense, yeah.
My what?
I
Yeah, they
think
are.
that's where that
Right.
CML housing committee will
Doesn't
come
make
in
me a
handy.
change.
Yeah.
You can tell right now. It's crazy up there.
To clarify, you looking for a public hearing process or just a
Call up.
Call up,
public hearing.
call up for if and when needed. We don't need a public hearing on everything.
Oh, God, no.
No,
No, just an opportunity to hear the public and then.
yeah,
Even
Got
if
it.
it's in the MX zones.
Yes.
Okay.
I
yeah.
would just say the MX zones.
They adjust the MX, not
Because it's right of use on the others, right? I heard,
It is, anything is
Residential?
still subject to a call.
oh, they are, even if it's right of use?
Well, everything we do is subject to a call up, but
It's
what,
harder to fight a right of use, isn't it? Yeah, I wouldn't
Yeah.
even call those up at all because I think we would be in trouble on those more,
It would be tricky.
especially if they've conformed to it.
yeah,
I would think it's more the MX because that's conditional use that'd be my vote. I'm not voting, but it would be my recommendation that we take only those because those conditional. The rest, I would say no.
I would support that as well. Let's keep it narrow in scope. And I liked what Sharon was saying earlier about, I know the team needs time to do all of this and we do have a shot clock on us right now. So if we find that we need more time to go through the comp plan, maybe what we do is we get something done now and then we can adjust later as needed to have a more thorough process.
I agree.
Yeah, and if we have to tighten up ours, like if that 17 days was us, then recommend, hey, can you do 7 days? If we do it on a Sunday or Tuesday, can we do the following Tuesday, the hearing?
Did I also hear if it doesn't meet the 90 days, then we forfeit the funding?
For a
For
year.
a year, all projects.
Every year on all
All
projects.
All projects. So other projects who have been blameless can be punished by a different.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so
So if we,
pull that call up, then
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. So it sounds like there's
just.
multiple
Yeah.
pieces where
Judicious
how to shrink all,
with it.
okay.
We've been really
Great
good
word.
so far.
Yeah, but if it's within the 90-day window.
Haven't shot it.
fine.
It's never done projects.
I think it does send the right message to the public that we still maintain some control in case
Yes.
there's some imaginary boogeyman that comes out of the
No.
forest.
Right.
But I think it's also important that we tell an accurate story about what the public's likely to see. That we have this cool opportunity and it's gonna translate into maybe a couple of hundred units over the course of several years if we're lucky.
Yeah.
If we're.
And that's it.
I think it's the little things like height and certain things that start freaking out the neighborhood. So
Yeah.
that's why I want to go back to the land or the zoning is can we tighten that up where even if one goes under, it's not a monster next to a house because like we get into shading issues and all sorts of stuff. But if it's like 3 stories, well, that seems to be more, understandable in the area, but
And people get wildly different ideas in their head about what 2 and 3 stories and 1,000
Yeah.
stories is. I mean, like,
but whatever,
and when it starts going up, they're like,
it always looks big because there was nothing there before.
correct. And then, we hear about that and it's hard for people to imagine exactly how big things are. There used to be a guy that would do development and he would put a balloon out there.
Oh, yeah, and let you look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember who did that. They did it here.
It's a great idea.
Well, it was, but it was also without any context. It made it look 10 times bigger than it was actually going to look. Because there's nothing and then there's balloon like way up in the sky and you're like, yeah, I don't want that.
Yeah, I don't know that serves him very well.
Well,
Yeah.
I know that
All right,
there's
let's-
that issue with
All right, we're
Allendale.
getting real close to the end, Randy.
Yep.
So Jessica, I am very hungry for learning more about the process around the comp plan that you've mentioned. And I love what I'm hearing. And direct me to where I need to go on the website if it's all laid out or if it's yet to come, let me know. But I really want to tell my constituents. I mean, obviously we have the advisory committee that's people have applied and that deadline is passed. I understand that. But what are the next steps? What are the next phases? What does that look like over the next, where are the key points that our residents are gonna be able to engage at a local level? I want to learn more.
There's
about
a
that.
page on our website.
The details, all of
Yeah.
that.
But it would be really cool to do one of those podcasts too.
There already is one, actually, Paul Donegan just did one.
Okay.
We have sorry, this has nothing to do with this anymore, but
Unrelated.
yeah, it is related. So we, at least at this point, have a workshop scheduled August 25th
Okay.
with the council and the planning commission that we are going to do. We're going to be bringing a lot of information that essentially kind of caps phase 1 of this process. We have 4 phases. So coming back to phase 1, which is at this point, it's existing conditions, information gathering. Right now, they're just pulling a lot of information from us. We're forming the community advisory group. There is going to be more information coming out to you hopefully this week in the memo. where we are asking each of the council members to actually appoint a member to the community advisory group. And we'll show you the list of folks that have applied and the list that we have accepted. Nothing has been sent out to anybody yet, so it's all on the down low. We'll talk more about what the process is. We're just getting started. So
I
essentially.
assume that, but I just love what you were little tidbits you were giving, and I'm like, I want more.
Yeah, there's good information on our website.
Yeah.
So, but we will be, basically, our hope is to get back for the community advisory group in the next couple of weeks after we hear back from the council and we can make those appointments. We also have a technical advisory committee that is formed that is all internal. Those groups aren't really going to start getting ready. They're not going to be activated until probably midsummer.
So midsummer, and when we start doing more public engagement will be when then?
We're doing it throughout. So we actually have already started a lot of public engagements. So, let's see. We have, I'm trying to think of we have Summerfest coming up that we'll be at. We were at
Kite Fest.
Kite Fest.
We brought the kids here.
Yeah,
I knew the high school.
The kids were cute.
Students have been here. We've been to the high school a couple of times. We're actually meeting with 2 other high schools now to start working on our next group. We have met with some service providers. We are putting together kind of our list of focus groups that we're going to be going after. So all of that is happening right now. And I think our website we're trying to do those compilations. And plus in the Arvada report, we're also doing quarterly updates. But if you ever want to reach out and just say, what's happening today, just send me an email. I'd be happy to tell you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much.
All right.
Just one more thing to keep in mind with timing as we're reaching the second half of the year. If we're updating the land development code, we'll be doing that via ordinance, right?
Yes, but not at the same time as the comp plan.
No, but for this, the item of
CUP.
the subject of the study session. So we'll need to factor in time for 2 readings ahead of the deadline.
But this will be a resolution, correct? Do we need 2 readings for a resolution?
No, but are we updating the land development code or changing the?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that we need to do. I think the resolution is due by the end of December that says that we are going to do this. So we could potentially schedule that for
Ahead of time and then
2027.
do the ordinance to actually change the code.
The resolution is what DOLA is looking for.
Okay.
Just real quick, it's from a strategic level, this is one element of the bigger picture. So when you look at land use, zoning, comprehensive, and because this is a new element, let's just make sure we're not focused on the one subject. It's all 4 subjects coalescing together.
Yep.
And sometimes I feel like we will chase that one soccer ball and forget about all the others. That we need to look holistically what's best for our community, not just 1, 2, 3. So when you're going through your process, you just holistically look at all of those.
Yeah.
Because we might need to pull and push those levers to just adjust so that we can do this.
We will.
Great. All right. Then if there's nothing more for the good of the order, Ms. Garner, do you feel like your team knows what? Okay,
Yeah,
great.
thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Then we'll go ahead and stop the study session. Everybody go grab dinner and we'll come back for our 5 p.m.